Constitutional Conversations is a series of discussions by America's leading scholars about the principles, framing, ratification, and implementation of constitutional government in the United States. This series is hosted by the James Madison Memorial Fellowship Foundation of Alexandria, Virginia.
Now, let's talk about moderation.
Yes.
And if you like, allude to the book that you've written on that topic and how that spirit of moderation, if you will, informed the American experiment in ordered liberty.
Yes. Montesquieu came along and was translated into English and hit America just at a time that moderation was more accepted and popular as a concept than it might be now. And the idea of moderation, as Montesquieu defines it, is that in political affairs, just as in other dimensions of life, we can all think of a good idea that goes too far, or we can identify something as extreme, or it's become extreme. Aristotle had originally contributed this idea in thinking about virtues, excellences of human beings, that the way to define a virtue like courage is to find it as the right mean, the right middle ground, the right moderate point between two maybe temptations or tendencies that are at the extremes. Montesquieu adopts this explicitly as the central principle of his political philosophy, that the political good, he said, will always be found between extremes. The spirit of the philosopher and of the legislator and the statesman ought to be the spirit of moderation. So, as I mentioned earlier, these two kind of structural principles that many Americans would know about, and we can trace directly to Montesquieu, the separation of powers in a government, and then another kind of separation of powers, federalism, a federal republic in which there's a real government in say, the center or at the federal level, and there are real governments in the member states. Those are kinds of balances that in Montesquieu's way of explaining them, the English have versions of them, they help politics to be better because they make it less likely that the whole political order will go to an extreme. The legislature won't dominate, the executive won't dominate, the judges and lawyers, the judiciary won't dominate, if they're all, on the one hand, separated from each other and then balanced against or balanced with each other. Federalism, the federal republic, it will be better both for the smaller the smaller republics, the states, and better for the whole if each has the other, and each in a way has to argue with and contend with the other. So moderation is partly a negative principle. It's avoiding an extreme. It's avoiding something bad that could happen in politics. It's also, for Montesquieu, a positive principle. You're likely to get more justice. It's a higher middle ground rather than a lower middle ground, or at least it's meant to be. With these complicated structures, if you have multiple powers and bodies that have to argue with each other, you'll produce better ideas, more just ideas, if you have this structure producing balance. And then we have to use, the title of his book says, we have to have the right spirit. We have to have the right education and the right approach to use these complicated constitutional institutions in the right way.